You're sitting in a dimly lit theater, watching a magician make a coin vanish from their fingertips. You know it's a trick. You know the coin didn't actually disappear into thin air. Yet in that moment, despite everything your rational mind tells you, you experience genuine wonder. Your brain, confronted with something that seems impossible, lights up with the thrill of mystery. And here's the beautiful paradox. Knowing it's an illusion doesn't diminish the magic. If anything, it deepens it. Welcome back to Midnight Deep Dive, or if you're new here, welcome to our cozy corner of the internet where we explore history's most fascinating subjects. Wherever you are right now, I'm so glad you've decided to join me. Tonight, we're diving into the history and evolution of magic. Not the supernatural kind, but the art of illusion. The deliberate, skillful deception that has entertained, mystified, and occasionally terrified humans for thousands of years. We'll trace magic from ancient temple priests performing miracles to modern mentalists reading minds on television, exploring not just how tricks evolved, but why humans have always been drawn to being fooled. So curl up, let yourself get cozy, and join me as we explore the fascinating story of how humans learned to create the impossible. Our story begins not in theaters or on television, but in the temples of ancient civilizations, where the line between magic and miracle was deliberately kept invisible. 4,000 years ago, in the sweltering heat of an Egyptian temple, a priest stands before an assembly of nobles and common people. He gestures toward a bronze statue of a god, speaking sacred words in a voice that echoes off the stone columns. And then, impossibly, the statue speaks back. Its bronze lips don't move, but a voice emanates from it. The voice of the god itself, answering questions, delivering prophecies, blessing the faithful. The crowd gasps, prostrates themselves, makes offerings. They've witnessed a miracle, direct evidence that the gods walk among them and speak through their priests. What they don't know is that beneath the temple floor, hidden in carefully constructed chambers and passages, another priest speaks through a system of tubes and acoustic channels that carry his voice to the statue's hollow interior. The miracle is real to those who witness it, but it's also, undeniably, a trick. This is where our story of magic really begins, not with entertainment, but with power. The earliest forms of what we might recognize as magic weren't performed for amusement. They were demonstrations of authority, tools of political and religious control, ways of manifesting divine power in the physical world. And they were extraordinarily effective. The ancient Egyptians were masters of this sacred theater. Archaeological evidence and historical accounts describe elaborate temple mechanisms designed to create supernatural effects. Statues with hidden chambers where priests could hide to deliver prophecies. Doors that opened by themselves when fires were lit on altars. The heat expanding air in sealed chambers connected to the door's hinges by hidden pipes. Wine that turned to water, or water that turned to wine, through careful management of liquids in vessels with false bottoms or hidden compartments. The Westcar Papyrus, an ancient Egyptian text from around 1700 BCE, contains what might be the oldest written account of a magic performance. It describes a magician named Dedi who performed for Pharaoh Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid. According to the text, Dedi could reattach the severed head of a goose, making the bird walk around alive again after its head had been cut off. He supposedly performed the same feat with other birds and with an ox. Was this real? Almost certainly not, at least not the way the text describes. But what's fascinating is that the story exists at all. Even if the performance was illusion rather than miracle, the fact that it was written down and preserved tells us that magic, the art of creating seemingly impossible effects, was already established and valued in ancient Egypt over 3,500 years ago. The ancient Greeks and Romans continued this tradition, though they were often more skeptical about the source of magical effects. Greek philosophers and writers documented various tricks and illusions, sometimes with a critical eye toward those who claimed supernatural powers. The philosopher Hippolytus, writing in the 3rd century CE, actually described how temple priests created their miracles, exposing the mechanisms behind talking statues and self-opening doors. He wasn't trying to promote atheism. He was arguing against heretics by showing that their miracles were just tricks that any priest might employ. But perhaps the most interesting thing about Greek and Roman attitudes toward magic is the distinction they drew between different types of deception. Tricks performed openly for entertainment, what we might call conjuring or legerdemain, were generally acceptable and even admired. But claiming those same tricks were genuine supernatural powers was considered fraudulent and potentially criminal. The Romans had laws against malevolent magic and sorcery, but stage performers who admitted they were creating illusions through skill rather than supernatural means were perfectly legal. We know the Romans enjoyed magic as entertainment because they wrote about it. Seneca the Younger, writing in the 1st century CE, described street performers who could make balls appear and disappear, seemingly multiply objects, and perform other feats of manual dexterity. These weren't priests claiming divine power. They were skilled entertainers plying a trade. One particularly sophisticated trick described in ancient sources involves what we now call the cups and balls, one of the oldest known magic tricks in existence. A performer would place a ball under one of 3 cups, then shuffle them around. When the cups were lifted, the ball would have vanished or multiplied or moved to a different cup. The Roman writer Alciphron described such a performer in the 2nd century CE, calling him a thaumaturgist, a wonder worker. The cups and balls is significant because it's a trick that relies purely on skill, sleight of hand, misdirection, and years of practice. There's no mechanism, no hidden apparatus, just a performer's trained hands moving faster and more deceptively than the audience's eyes and brain can track. The fact that this trick was being performed 2,000 years ago and is still performed today by magicians worldwide tells us something profound about magic's appeal. The fundamental experience of watching something impossible happen hasn't changed in 2 millennia. Ancient magic wasn't confined to the Mediterranean world. Chinese historical texts describe conjurers performing at imperial courts as early as the Qin dynasty, around 200 BCE. Indian Sanskrit texts mention street performers and court magicians. The universality of magic, the fact that every culture we know of developed some form of illusion and wonderworking, suggests it fulfills something deeply human. But in most of these ancient contexts, there was still a blurry line between entertainment and claimed supernatural power. Magicians might perform at festivals and markets as entertainers, but others might claim their effects came from genuine magical knowledge or spiritual powers. The charlatans and the honest entertainers worked in the same space, using similar techniques but making very different claims. The medieval period in Europe saw this ambiguity intensify in troubling ways. The Catholic Church held immense power, and anything that looked like miracle working outside church authority was potentially heretical. Yet street performers and traveling entertainers continued to perform tricks. They just had to be very careful about how they presented their work. Medieval conjurors, the word comes from the Latin conjurare, meaning to swear together or to plot, were often viewed with suspicion. Were they harmless entertainers or were they practicing forbidden arts? The distinction mattered enormously when accusations of witchcraft could lead to execution. So medieval magicians developed ways of presenting their work that made it clear they were skilled performers, not sorcerers. They'd often begin performances with disclaimers, explaining they worked through natural magic, meaning clever tricks and scientific principles, rather than demonic magic. They might attribute their abilities to long study of natural philosophy, suggesting their seemingly impossible feats came from understanding hidden natural laws rather than supernatural intervention. This was a survival strategy, but it was also the beginning of magic positioning itself as a demonstration of human ingenuity rather than spiritual power. Medieval magic was often performed at markets, fairs, and festivals. Performers would gather crowds with a combination of juggling, acrobatics, storytelling, and illusions. A successful performer needed to be part athlete, part comedian, part psychologist, and part expert in human perception. They learned to read crowds, build anticipation, create moments of surprise, and leave audiences amazed but not frightened. The tricks themselves were becoming more sophisticated. Medieval performers developed portable apparatus, special cups, boxes with false bottoms, bags with hidden compartments. They learned timing and patter, the constant flow of talk that directs attention and provides cover for secret moves. They began to understand that magic wasn't just about the method of a trick, but about the presentation, the story, the theatrical framework that made the impossible seem momentarily real. One medieval manuscript, The Hours of Adelaide of Savoy, from the 15th century, contains a marginal illustration showing what appears to be the cups and balls being performed. The image shows a performer at a table with an audience gathered around. Visual evidence that magic as entertainment was thriving even in an era we often imagine as dominated by superstition and fear of the supernatural. What's particularly interesting about this period is how magic began to separate into distinct categories. There were the street performers doing tricks at markets. There were learned men who studied optical illusions and mechanical devices, creating wonders through applied science. There were court entertainers who might perform for nobility. And there were those who claimed genuine supernatural powers, astrologers, alchemists, and various kinds of mystics and prophets. These categories weren't always distinct. A single person might study astronomy and astrology, perform mechanical tricks at court, and also claim genuine magical knowledge. But the categories were beginning to emerge, creating space for magic as pure entertainment to develop its own identity separate from claims of supernatural power. By the time we reached the Renaissance, this process was accelerating. The revival of classical learning, the development of printing, the rise of scientific inquiry, all of these created an environment where magic could flourish as both art and demonstration of human cleverness. The stage was being set for magic's transformation from sacred deception and street performance into something new. A sophisticated art form in its own right. If you wanted to trace a single thread through the entire history of magic, you could do worse than following the cups and balls. This deceptively simple trick, small balls appearing, disappearing, and moving between inverted cups, has been performed continuously for at least 2,000 years, probably longer. It survived because it contains, in miniature, everything that makes magic work: misdirection, manual dexterity, audience management, and the creation of impossible moments through purely physical skill. By the Renaissance, the cups and balls had become the signature trick of traveling conjurors throughout Europe. These performers, often called jongleurs or jugglers, from the same root as conjure, traveled from town to town, performing at markets, fairs, and festivals. They'd set up a small folding table, gather a crowd with juggling or comic patter, then perform a series of increasingly impossible effects with nothing more than 3 cups and a few small balls. But here's what made the trick brilliant: it was infinitely adaptable. A basic performer could do a simple version that amazed children and simple folk. A skilled performer could elaborate it into a theatrical presentation that entertained sophisticated urban audiences. A master could turn it into a demonstration of such impossible dexterity that even other magicians would be fooled. The trick grew with the performer's skill. The Renaissance period saw the first published books that explained magic tricks, though they were carefully presented as exposing fraud rather than teaching magic. Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft, published in 1584, included a section describing various juggling tricks and illusions. Scott's intent was serious. He wanted to show that many things people attributed to witchcraft were actually tricks that any skilled performer could learn. but in doing so, he created one of the first magic instruction manuals in English. Scott described the cups and balls in detail, explaining how performers would conceal extra balls, load them under cups during seemingly innocent movements, and create the appearance of balls multiplying, vanishing, or passing through solid copper. Reading his descriptions, you realize that the fundamental techniques hadn't changed since Roman times. What had changed was the sophistication of presentation and the social context in which magic was performed. During the 16th and 17th centuries, magic began to split into more distinct performance styles. Street performers continued their traditional role, working for whatever coins crowds would throw. But increasingly, skilled conjurers were being hired to perform at the courts of nobility and for wealthy merchants. These court performers needed more sophisticated acts, better costumes, and presentations that fit aristocratic entertainment. One significant development was the parlor magician, performers who did smaller, more intimate magic for private gatherings rather than large public audiences. These magicians worked closer to their spectators, which required different techniques. You can't rely on distance and stage lighting to hide your methods when noble ladies and gentlemen are standing 3 feet away, examining everything you do. So parlor magicians developed incredibly refined sleight of hand, using psychology and subtle misdirection rather than theatrical distance. The French court, particularly under Louis XIV, became a center for sophisticated magic. The Sun King loved entertainment, and skilled performers could make good livings creating wonders for court festivities. These weren't street performers doing simple tricks. They were artists creating elaborate theatrical presentations that combined magic with music, dance, and spectacle. But the most significant development of this period was the gradual emergence of magic as a respected profession, rather than a suspicious fringe activity. Successful magicians began writing under their own names, performing in established venues, and being treated as legitimate entertainers rather than potential criminals or heretics. The shift was slow and uneven. Street performers were still often harassed, and magic retained an association with fraud and deception. But the foundation was being laid for magic's later respectability. One name worth knowing from this period is Isaac Fox, an English conjurer who performed in the early 18th century. Fox was wildly successful, performing at London's major fairs and reportedly earning enormous sums. Claims that he made £10,000 in 1 year, which would be millions in modern money. Whether the numbers are accurate or not, Fox represented a new type of magician, a businessman who marketed himself aggressively, created elaborate stage presentations, and made magic a profitable enterprise. Fox performed in a booth at Bartholomew Fair in London, which was one of the major entertainment events of the year. His advertisements promised dexterity of hand and wonderful curiosities. He had mechanical devices, optical illusions, and traditional sleight of hand, all combined into a varied entertainment. He understood that successful magic was as much about spectacle and presentation as about the tricks themselves. The 18th century also saw the rise of what we might call mechanical magic. Illusions created using clockwork mechanisms, optical devices, and ingenious apparatus, rather than pure sleight of hand. This reflected the broader Enlightenment fascination with machinery and scientific demonstration. Magicians began positioning themselves not just as entertainers, but as demonstrators of curious mechanical and optical principles. One popular form was automata, mechanical figures that could apparently write, play music, or perform other complex tasks. While not strictly magic in the sense of illusions, these devices were often presented in magic shows and created wonder through their apparent impossibility. How could a mechanical device think, write, or create? The answer involved elaborate clockwork and clever mechanisms, but the effect was magical. The most famous automaton of the era was the Mechanical Turk, created by Wolfgang von Kempelen in 1770. This was a life-sized figure of a man in Turkish clothing, seated at a cabinet with a chessboard on top. The Turk could play chess and play it well, defeating most human opponents. Kempelen would open the cabinet before performances, showing the audience the elaborate clockwork inside, proving that it was a genuine machine, not a hidden human operator. Except, of course, it was a hidden human operator. The cabinet had a false back, and a small chess master would hide inside during games, operating the Turk's arm with a system of levers and magnets while watching the game through the Turk's eyes. When Kempelen opened the cabinet to show the machinery, the operator would shift position to stay hidden in the section that wasn't being displayed. It was brilliant deception, and it fooled most observers for decades. The mechanical Turk wasn't exactly traditional magic, but it demonstrated several principles that were becoming central to the art. First, that the apparently impossible could be achieved through clever engineering and human skill rather than supernatural powers. Second, that bold presentation and confident explanation could sell even the most unlikely claim. And third, that audiences wanted to believe in the impossible, even when logic suggested they were being tricked. By the late 18th century, magic was poised for a transformation. It had evolved from sacred deception and street performance into a recognized form of entertainment, with professional practitioners, established venues, and paying audiences. The techniques had become more sophisticated, the presentations more theatrical, and the social status of magicians had risen from suspicious wanderers to respected entertainers. The cups and balls, that ancient trick, was still being performed, but now as part of elaborate presentations that might include mechanical wonders, optical illusions, mental demonstrations, and comic patter. A magician's show was no longer just a series of tricks, but a complete theatrical experience designed to entertain and amaze. Here's a fascinating paradox. The Age of Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, scientific method, and rational inquiry into natural laws, created the perfect conditions for magic to flourish as never before. You might think that an era dedicated to exposing superstition and explaining the natural world would be hostile to illusion and deception. Instead, it gave birth to magic's first golden age. The key was in how magicians repositioned themselves. Rather than claiming supernatural powers or appealing to mystical forces, Enlightenment-era magicians presented themselves as demonstrators of scientific principles, masters of natural philosophy, and skilled practitioners of natural magic. The creation of wonders through knowledge of physics, optics, chemistry, and human psychology, rather than through communion with spirits or supernatural entities. This rebranding was brilliant. It allowed magicians to benefit from the public's growing fascination with science, while maintaining the sense of wonder and impossibility that made their performances entertaining. A magician could make something vanish and explain it as demonstrating optical principles or the physics of attention, without actually revealing how the trick worked. The scientific framing gave magic respectability, while the maintained mystery preserved its entertainment value. The person who perfected this approach was a Frenchman named Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, often called the father of modern magic. Robert Houdin performed in the mid-19th century, technically after the Enlightenment proper, but he built on foundations laid in that earlier era. His career demonstrates how magic successfully navigated the transition from suspicious folk practice to respected theatrical art. Robert Houdin was trained as a watchmaker, and he brought that precision and mechanical expertise to magic. He created beautiful apparatus, polished wooden boxes, gleaming metal devices, elegant furniture pieces that looked like scientific instruments or the products of fine craftsmanship rather than the crude props of street performers. His stage was set like a Victorian drawing room, complete with fashionable furniture and tasteful decorations. He performed in evening clothes rather than exotic robes or mystical costumes. The message was clear: This was sophisticated entertainment for educated people, not superstitious mysticism for the gullible. Robert Houdin called himself a professor and presented his magic as demonstrations of second sight, ethereal suspension, and various scientific principles. He never claimed supernatural powers. Instead, he claimed something almost more impressive: complete mastery of natural laws and human perception. One of his most famous illusions was the ethereal suspension, where he appeared to support his son in a horizontal position in midair, using only a single pole under one of the boy's arms. The audience knew it was a trick. Robert Houdin never claimed it was real magic, but the elegance and apparent impossibility of it created genuine wonder. How was it done? The audience could speculate about hidden supports, special braces, or clever mechanics, but they couldn't figure it out, and that maintained the mystery. Robert Houdin's approach influenced generations of magicians after him. He showed that magic could be presented as sophisticated art rather than mere trickery, that apparatuses could be beautiful objects in themselves, and that the performer's persona mattered as much as the tricks themselves. He also demonstrated that honestly admitting you're creating illusions through skill and knowledge doesn't diminish the wonder. It might actually enhance it. But Robert Houdin was building on a foundation that had been laid decades earlier during the Enlightenment proper. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, public interest in scientific demonstrations created opportunities for performers who could present educational entertainment. Traveling lecturers would demonstrate electrical phenomena, optical illusions, pneumatic devices, and chemical reactions to paying audiences hungry for knowledge and spectacle. Magicians inserted themselves into this space brilliantly. They would begin performances with apparently scientific demonstrations, showing optical illusions, demonstrating principles of leverage and balance, explaining how mirrors and lenses could deceive the eye. Then they would transition into effects that seemed to use similar principles, but were actually clever tricks. The audience's mental state, primed to accept scientific explanations, made them more receptive to the magician's framing of impossible effects as natural phenomena they simply didn't yet understand. One particularly clever variation was the phantasmagoria. Elaborate theatrical shows that used magic lanterns, early slide projectors, smoke, mirrors, and hidden mechanisms to create the appearance of ghosts and spirits. These shows were popular in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, particularly in France. The presenters would often begin by exposing fraudulent spirit mediums and explaining how ghosts were simply optical tricks. Then they would proceed to create far more convincing ghosts themselves, using superior technology and technique. The message was sophisticated. Yes, ghosts are illusions, but aren't they wonderful illusions? The phantasmagoria shows invited audiences to enjoy being frightened and amazed, while maintaining rational understanding that they were seeing tricks, not actual spirits. It was Enlightenment thinking applied to entertainment. Acknowledge the mechanism while enjoying the effect. The development of sophisticated optical devices during this period gave magicians powerful new tools. Pepper's ghost, invented in the mid-19th century, used angled glass and controlled lighting to create transparent, ghostly figures that appeared and disappeared on stage. The technique was based on simple reflection, but the effect was spectacular. The inventor, John Henry Pepper, was a chemistry professor who demonstrated the technique at the Royal Polytechnic Institution in London. Another example of the close relationship between scientific demonstration and magical entertainment. Chemical magic also flourished during this era. Magicians would create apparently miraculous transformations using chemical reactions. Liquids would change color, flames would appear spontaneously, substances would vanish or transform. While presented as magic, these effects used real chemistry, just applied in theatrical ways that most audience members wouldn't recognize. A magician who understood chemistry had access to effects that seemed genuinely impossible to audiences unfamiliar with chemical reactions. The Enlightenment also saw the rise of what we might call mental magic or mentalism. Performers would claim to read minds, predict future events, or demonstrate supernatural mental powers. Like their colleagues doing physical magic, the smart mentalists framed their acts carefully. They weren't claiming genuine psychic powers, though some did. They were demonstrating the possibilities of trained observation, psychological insight, and mental discipline. One technique that became popular was the second sight act, where a blindfolded performer would appear to perceive objects, read writing, or even see through solid barriers. These acts used various methods: secret codes between the performer and an assistant, carefully structured questions that conveyed information, and sometimes just careful observation before the blindfold was applied. But the presentation suggested either genuine extrasensory perception or such highly trained mental faculties that the performer could perceive through unconventional means. The development of magic during the Enlightenment reflects broader cultural transformations. As society became more urban, more literate, and more skeptical of traditional religious authority, people still craved wonder and mystery. They just wanted it in forms compatible with modern sensibilities. Magic provided that. It offered impossible experiences within a framework that acknowledged human skill and ingenuity rather than supernatural intervention. This era also saw magic begin to generate its own literature and community. Magicians wrote books not just to expose frauds, but to document techniques and share knowledge with other practitioners. Trade journals appeared, allowing magicians to communicate, share new illusions, and debate methodology. Magic was becoming a professional field with its own knowledge base, ethics, and standards of practice. The ethical code that would eventually become central to modern magic was taking shape during this period. The idea that magicians shouldn't expose other magicians' secrets, that methods should be protected to preserve the art's mystery, that there's an important distinction between magic as entertainment and fraudulent claims of supernatural powers. All of these principles emerged during the Enlightenment and its immediate aftermath. By the mid-19th century, magic had completed a remarkable transformation. What began as sacred deception in ancient temples evolved through medieval street performance and Renaissance court entertainment, had become a respected theatrical art form with professional practitioners, dedicated venues, enthusiastic audiences, and growing cultural prestige. Magicians were no longer suspect wanderers or potential heretics. They were popular entertainers and, in some cases, cultural celebrities. The Enlightenment's great gift to magic was legitimacy. By embracing scientific framing and rational explanation, without actually explaining their methods, magicians found a way to practice their art in an era increasingly skeptical of supernatural claims. They proved that wonder didn't require belief in the impossible. It only required experiencing the impossible, even while knowing it was skillfully created illusion. And the art form was about to enter an even more dramatic phase. The late 19th century would see magic become mass entertainment, would produce the first international magic celebrities, and would establish many of the forms and presentations that still define magic today. But that story, with its grand illusions and elaborate stage presentations, is where we'll continue our journey next time. Picture a darkened Victorian theater, gaslight flickering against velvet curtains. The stage is set with elaborate painted scenery, perhaps an Egyptian temple or a mysterious Oriental palace. The orchestra plays dramatic music as a figure in formal evening dress steps into the spotlight. With a flourish, the magician gestures toward an empty cabinet. A beautiful assistant steps inside, the doors close, and then, impossibly, she vanishes completely. The cabinet is opened, turned around, shown to be genuinely empty. And then, moments later, she reappears at the back of the theater, waving to the astonished audience. This was magic in the Victorian era, grand, theatrical, spectacular. The 19th century, particularly its latter half, saw magic transform into large-scale entertainment that filled theaters and captivated mass audiences. Magicians were no longer just skilled performers doing tricks. They were stars, showmen, creators of elaborate spectacles that combined illusion with theater, technology, and pure stagecraft. The Victorian fascination with magic emerged from several converging factors. First, the Industrial Revolution had created new technologies and materials that made elaborate stage mechanisms possible. Hydraulics, electric motors, sophisticated pulley systems, and precision metalworking allowed magicians to build apparatus that would have been impossible in earlier eras. A Victorian magician had access to engineering capabilities that Robert Houdin could only dream of. Second, the rise of large purpose-built theaters created venues perfect for spectacular magic. These weren't small parlors or makeshift stages at fairs. They were grand buildings with fly space above the stage for raising and lowering scenery, trap doors in the stage floor for quick appearances and disappearances, and sophisticated lighting systems that could direct audience attention and hide mechanisms. The architecture of Victorian theaters was practically designed for magical deception. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Victorian society was experiencing profound cultural tensions around science, spirituality, and the nature of reality. This was the age of Darwin, when evolution challenged traditional religious narratives. It was the age of rapid technological change, when inventions like photography, telegraphy, and electric lighting made the impossible routine. And it was the age of spiritualism, when millions of people genuinely believed that the dead could communicate with the living through mediums and seances. Into this strange cultural moment stepped the Victorian magicians, and they flourished. Some became entertainers pure and simple, creating ever more elaborate illusions with no claims beyond showmanship. Others positioned themselves as exposers of fraudulent mediums, using their knowledge of tricks to reveal how supposed spirit communications were actually clever deceptions. And some, most controversially, blurred the lines, suggesting that perhaps their abilities went beyond mere trickery into realms of genuine supernatural power. The Spiritualism movement, which began in America in the 1840s and spread rapidly through Britain and Europe, created both opportunities and challenges for magicians. At its peak, millions of people attended seances, hoping to contact deceased loved ones through mediums who would produce phenomena like table tipping, mysterious knocks, materialized hands reaching from darkness, voices speaking in different languages, and even full-body apparitions of spirits. Many magicians recognized these phenomena as tricks they themselves could duplicate. The spirit cabinet that mediums used, a small enclosed space where the medium would sit, supposedly allowing spirits to manifest more easily, was just a dark environment where various techniques of illusion could be employed unseen. The rappings and knocks could be produced by hidden mechanisms or even by skilled toe-cracking. The materialized hands were often just the medium's own hands or those of an accomplice, made to look ghostly through the use of luminous paint in darkness. Some magicians made careers exposing these frauds. They would attend seances, observe the methods being used, and then duplicate the same phenomena on stage while explaining exactly how they were done. This served multiple purposes. It provided entertaining theater, positioned the magician as a rational truth-teller, and often attracted even larger audiences than the spiritualists themselves. But here's where it gets complicated. Other magicians incorporated spiritualist elements into their acts, without clearly stating whether they were claims or illusions. They would perform spirit cabinet demonstrations, produce apparent communication from the dead, or demonstrate psychic powers, all while maintaining ambiguous silence about whether these were genuine supernatural phenomena or merely very good tricks. This ambiguity was profitable. An audience that believed they were witnessing genuine supernatural manifestations might pay more and attend more frequently than one that knew they were seeing acknowledged tricks. But it was also ethically problematic, particularly when grieving people desperate to contact lost loved ones might be deceived into believing fraudulent claims. The most famous figure to navigate these murky waters was Harry Houdini, though his career peaked slightly later in the early 20th century. Houdini's relationship with spiritualism was complex and fascinating. In his early career, he and his wife Bess performed a second sight act that implied psychic powers. But Houdini never actually claimed supernatural abilities. He presented it as a skillful performance, though audiences often chose to believe otherwise. Later in life, Houdini became spiritualism's most famous debunker. After his mother's death, he attended numerous seances hoping to contact her, but recognized all of them as fraud. This transformed him into a crusader against fraudulent mediums. He would attend seances in disguise, observe the methods, and then expose them publicly. He testified before Congress about spiritualist fraud. He offered a standing reward to any medium who could produce a genuine supernatural phenomenon under controlled conditions. A reward never successfully claimed during his lifetime. What made Houdini's crusade particularly powerful was that he could duplicate everything the mediums did. When a medium produced mysterious knockings, Houdini could produce the same sounds and show multiple methods for creating them. When a medium materialized a spirit hand, Houdini could show how to create the same effect using simple props and darkness. His message was clear. If a stage magician who admits to using tricks can create these effects, why should anyone believe a medium's claim that they're genuine supernatural phenomena? But Houdini also understood something profound about why spiritualism appealed to people. He desperately wanted to believe he could contact his beloved mother. He understood the grief and longing that made people vulnerable to fraudulent mediums. So while he was ruthless in exposing fraud, he was often gentle with the deceived believers, recognizing them as victims rather than fools. The Victorian era also saw the development of what magicians call stage illusions. Large-scale tricks involving elaborate apparatus, often with the magician or an assistant vanishing, transforming, or apparently defying physical laws. These became the centerpieces of magic shows and the tricks that audiences most remembered. One of the most famous was sawing a woman in half, though the version most people know was actually developed in the 1920s by P.T. Selbit and improved by Horace Golden. The basic concept: a woman placed in a box, apparently cut in half by a saw, yet emerging unharmed, captured Victorian anxieties about industrialization, women's roles, and the vulnerability of the human body to machinery. The illusion was shocking, impossible, and tremendously popular. The substitution trunk, or metamorphosis, was another Victorian-era creation that remained popular for decades. Two people would trade places instantaneously. One locked in a trunk, the other standing outside, and in a flash they would switch positions. Houdini performed this with his wife Bess, promoting it as the world's fastest illusion. The trick combined escape artistry, quick movements, and clever apparatus design in ways that seemed absolutely impossible to audiences. Victorian magicians also developed the art of stage presence and theatrical presentation to new heights. It wasn't enough to make something vanish. You had to build dramatic tension, create a narrative around the illusion, and deliver it with showmanship that made the impossible moment feel even more significant. Magicians studied acting, timing, and audience psychology. They learned to control not just what the audience saw, but when they saw it, and how they interpreted what they saw. The introduction of electric lighting was revolutionary for magic. Gas lighting had been tricky and somewhat unpredictable. Electric lights could be controlled precisely, brought up or down on cue, focused as spotlights, or used to create dramatic shadows. A magician could use light and darkness to direct attention, hide mechanisms, and create atmospheres ranging from mysterious to spectacular. Modern stage magic would have been impossible without electric lighting. The Victorian era also produced the first true magic celebrities. Performers whose fame extended beyond their immediate audiences through newspaper coverage, promotional tour, and published memoirs. These weren't just skilled magicians. They were personalities, characters who crafted public personas as carefully as they designed their illusions. One such figure was Alexander Herrmann, known as Herrmann the Great. He cultivated a devilish image, pointed beard, dramatic gestures, mysterious accent, that made him seem like a conjurer from another realm. But Herrmann was also a skilled businessman who understood publicity and audience engagement. He would perform tricks impromptu in restaurants, on trains, wherever he could gather an audience and generate publicity for his theater shows. Another was Chung Ling Soo, an American magician named William Robinson, who performed in an elaborate Chinese persona, complete with traditional costume, performed his entire act in pantomime, supposedly because he couldn't speak English, and maintained this character even offstage. It was cultural appropriation and ethnic stereotyping by modern standards, but it demonstrated how Victorian audiences craved the exotic and mysterious, and how magicians would construct elaborate personas to meet that desire. The tragic end of Chung Ling Soo's career also demonstrated the dangers of spectacular stage magic. His signature trick was catching a bullet, where rifles would be fired at him, and he would apparently catch the bullets in his teeth. In 1918, during a performance at the Wood Green Empire in London, the trick went wrong. The gun actually fired a real bullet, striking Soo in the chest. He collapsed, and as he lay dying, he reportedly spoke in English, breaking character for the first time in public in nearly 20 years. His final words were allegedly, "Oh my God, something's happened. Lower the curtain." He died the next morning. The bullet catch in various forms had killed at least a dozen magicians over the centuries. It was spectacular, dramatic, and genuinely dangerous even when performed correctly. That magicians continued performing it despite the risks demonstrates something about the Victorian appetite for spectacle, and the lengths performers would go to satisfy it. Victorian magic shows were also exercises in cultural imperialism and Orientalism. Many magicians created acts based on supposed Egyptian, Chinese, Indian, or Middle Eastern mysticism. These acts traded on Western audiences' fascination with exotic cultures, and their assumption that such cultures possessed mysterious knowledge unavailable to rational Western science. A magician in Egyptian costume performing ancient temple mysteries could create an atmosphere of authenticity and power that made the tricks seem more impressive. This was problematic on multiple levels. It reduced complex cultures to stereotypes, suggested that non-Western peoples were more superstitious and less rational, and allowed Western performers to profit from caricatured versions of other cultures' spiritual traditions. But it was also incredibly popular, and became a standard approach in Victorian magic that persisted well into the 20th century. The Victorian era established many of the frameworks and presentations that still define stage magic today. The grand illusion as the centerpiece of a show, the combination of smaller tricks and larger spectacles, the use of assistants, usually women, who would vanish, transform, or be placed in apparent danger. The magician as a sophisticated character, whether as a gentleman in evening dress or an exotic mystic from distant lands. All of these became standard during the Victorian period and remain influential in magic today. By the early 20th century, magic had become mass entertainment on an unprecedented scale. Theaters were filled with magic shows. Magicians toured internationally, performing for audiences from New York to London to Melbourne. Magic tricks were being sold to amateurs through mail-order catalogs. The art form had achieved complete cultural acceptance and enormous popularity. There's a photograph of Harry Houdini, taken in 1906, that captures something essential about his appeal. He's hanging upside down from a crane, suspended high above a city street, wrapped in a straitjacket. A crowd of thousands fills the street below, looking up at this man who has put himself in a position of absolute vulnerability, absolute restraint, absolute danger. And they're watching to see if he can get out. This was Houdini's genius. He transformed magic from watch me make this impossible thing happen into watch me escape from this impossible situation. The shift seems subtle, but it was revolutionary. Traditional magicians asked audiences to witness wonders. Houdini asked them to witness a test of human capability, a demonstration that restrictions could be overcome, that nothing could hold him, that he was, in his own words, the man who cannot be confined. Harry Houdini was born Eric Weiss in Budapest in 1874, immigrating to America with his family as a small child. He became interested in magic as a teenager, taking the stage name Houdini in homage to the French magician Robert Houdin. His early career was a struggle. He and his wife Bess performed in dime museums, medicine shows, and variety theaters, doing standard magic acts that earned them little money or recognition. The transformation came when Houdini shifted his focus to escapes. He'd always included handcuff escapes in his act, but in the late 1890s, he began making them the centerpiece, rather than just another trick. He would challenge local police departments to lock him in their handcuffs, shackles, and jail cells. He would invite committees from the audience to examine the restraints before they were applied. He would perform these escapes behind a curtain or inside a cabinet, so the audience couldn't see his methods, but the authenticity of the challenge was verified by the police and the committees. This approach was brilliant for several reasons. First, it generated publicity. When Houdini came to a new city, he would visit the police station and get himself locked in their most secure cell, then escape. Local newspapers would cover this, often on the front page. The story would emphasize that local police, with all their experience securing criminals, couldn't keep Houdini contained. This wasn't just advertising, it was news. Second, it created genuine dramatic tension. When Houdini was locked in handcuffs and chains, everyone knew intellectually that he would escape. That was the act. But watching him work, hearing the sounds of his struggles behind the curtain, seeing the minutes tick by, audiences experienced real anxiety. What if this time he couldn't do it? What if something went wrong? The fact that occasionally escapes would take longer than expected, that Houdini would sometimes emerge sweating and exhausted, only heightened the tension. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Houdini's escapes resonated with early 20th century American culture in profound ways. This was the age of industrialization, of immigrants seeking freedom and opportunity, of progressive era reforms challenging political and social restrictions. Houdini's escapes became metaphors for liberation, from physical constraints, from limitations, from anything that tried to hold you down. He was living proof that restrictions could be overcome through skill, determination, and intelligence. Houdini's most famous escapes became increasingly spectacular. The water torture cell, introduced in 1912, involved Houdini being locked in stocks upside down, then lowered into a water-filled cell with a locked glass front. The audience could see him underwater, restrained, running out of air. An assistant stood by with an axe, ready to break the glass if Houdini signaled distress. The escape typically took several minutes, an agonizingly long time to watch someone trapped underwater. The dramatic power of the water torture cell came from its visibility and its exploitation of primal fears. Unlike escapes performed behind a curtain, the audience could watch Houdini the entire time, seeing him struggle, seeing the water, seeing the seconds pass. The fear of drowning, of being trapped underwater unable to breathe, is deep and universal. Watching someone voluntarily place themselves in that situation created visceral anxiety that traditional magic tricks simply couldn't match. The Chinese water torture cell, as it was properly called, became so associated with Houdini that he performed it for nearly 15 years, right up until his death. it was dangerous. The mechanism was complex, the timing was critical, and one mistake could be fatal. But it was also the perfect Houdini escape. Spectacular, apparently impossible, genuinely dangerous, and metaphorically rich. Houdini also performed escapes from straitjackets, often while suspended upside down high above city streets. These outdoor escapes were free to the public, drawing enormous crowds and generating massive publicity. Photographs from these events show streets packed with thousands of people, all staring upward at a man struggling against canvas restraints while hanging from a crane or building. The genius of these outdoor escapes was that they were performed in full view. No curtains, no cabinets, nothing hidden. Audiences could watch every movement as Houdini contorted his body, working his arms and shoulders in ways that seemed anatomically impossible, gradually working his way free. The visibility created credibility. This wasn't a trick with hidden mechanisms. This was raw physical ability and flexibility on display. Houdini's escapes required real skill. He was extraordinarily fit, training constantly to maintain the flexibility and strength needed for his stunts. He studied locks, learning to pick them through touch alone. He learned to hold his breath for several minutes. He studied anatomy to understand how to dislocate joints temporarily and relocate them. He trained himself to remain calm in situations of genuine physical danger, when panic would mean failure or death. But Houdini was also using tricks, misdirection, and carefully constructed apparatus. The handcuffs that seemed so secure might have hidden weaknesses he knew about. The packing crates he escaped from had secret openings. The milk cans filled with water had mechanisms that allowed them to be opened from inside. Houdini's genius was in combining real skill with clever methods in ways that made every escape seem like pure athletic and mental ability. The line between real danger and theatrical danger in Houdini's act was deliberately blurred. Some of his escapes were genuinely dangerous. If he failed, he could drown, suffocate, or die from the fall. Other escapes looked dangerous, but were actually quite safe due to hidden safety mechanisms and methods. Houdini never clarified which was which, leaving audiences uncertain about just how much peril they were witnessing. This ambiguity was central to Houdini's appeal. He wasn't just an entertainer. He was a daredevil, a test pilot of human capability, someone who pushed boundaries and defied limitations. His escapes weren't just tricks to be admired. They were challenges to be overcome, and the audience's uncertainty about whether he would succeed created genuine dramatic tension. Houdini also understood celebrity and publicity in ways few performers of his era did. He wrote books, granted interviews, appeared in films, and cultivated relationships with journalists. He created challenges and stunts specifically designed to generate news coverage. When he challenged other magicians to duplicate his feats, he knew they either wouldn't respond, making him seem superior, or would fail publicly, again enhancing his reputation. His crusade against fraudulent spiritualists, which we touched on in the previous chapter, was partly motivated by genuine conviction, but also brilliant publicity. His public challenges to mediums, his exposures of fraud, his testimony to Congress, and his standing offer of a reward for genuine supernatural phenomena kept him in the public eye, and positioned him as a champion of rationality and truth. But there was also something poignant about Houdini's relationship with spiritualism. He desperately wanted to believe in life after death, wanted to contact his beloved mother after she died. He attended seances, hoping to find genuine phenomena. The fact that his knowledge of tricks and illusions prevented him from believing what he wanted to believe created a kind of tragedy in his life. He could see through every deception, which meant he could never have the comfort he sought. Houdini's death in 1926 was as dramatic as his life. The commonly told story is that a college student punched him in the abdomen to test his claim that he could withstand any blow, and that this ruptured Houdini's appendix, leading to peritonitis and death. The reality is more complex. Houdini was already suffering from appendicitis before the incident, and the punches may have simply aggravated an existing condition. But the dramatic narrative of Houdini dying from a challenge to his abilities fit his larger-than-life persona. Even in death, Houdini remained mysterious. Before dying, he and his wife Bess had arranged a code, a secret message that only the real Houdini would know. If any medium could deliver this message accurately, it would prove genuine contact with his spirit. For 10 years after his death, Bess attended seances and held annual seance sessions on Halloween, hoping for the message. It never came. Eventually, she declared the pact finished, saying, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man. The impact of Houdini on magic and popular culture is difficult to overstate. He transformed the public perception of what a magician could be. Not just someone who performed tricks, but a physical marvel, a celebrity, a crusader for truth, a symbol of human potential. His emphasis on escape artistry created an entire subgenre of magic that continues today. His approach to publicity and celebrity influenced performers across all entertainment fields, not just magic. More than that, Houdini became a cultural metaphor. To pull a Houdini means to escape from a difficult situation. His name became synonymous with impossible escapes and seeming miracles. Nearly a century after his death, he remains the most famous magician in history, the one name everyone knows even if they can't name another magician. His legacy also includes the ethical framework he helped establish for magic. Houdini was adamant about the distinction between entertainment and fraud. He had no problem with magic performed honestly as entertainment, but he fought tirelessly against people who used tricks to defraud grieving families or to claim genuine supernatural powers. This ethical stance, that magic is wonderful as acknowledged art, but wrong when presented as genuine supernatural ability, became central to modern magic's self-understanding. The irony of Houdini is that his greatest escapes were metaphorical as much as physical. He escaped from poverty, from the limitations of being an immigrant in America, from obscurity, from the normal bounds of fame. He escaped from being just another magician and became a cultural icon. And in doing so, he showed that the most powerful form of magic isn't making things vanish or appear. It's transforming yourself into something greater than your origins suggested possible. If you grew up in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s, magic probably meant television. Not live theater performances most people would never attend, but spectacular shows broadcast into living rooms nationwide, making magic a shared cultural experience in new ways. The magicians of television's golden age weren't just performing tricks. They were creating events, primetime specials that families watched together, that friends discussed the next day, that became cultural touchstones. The relationship between magic and television was complicated from the start. On one hand, television seemed perfect for magic. The camera could show close-ups that even the best theater seats couldn't match, allowing viewers to see details with a clarity that live audiences missed. Television reached millions of people simultaneously, creating audience sizes that no touring magician could ever achieve. And television could use editing, special effects, and camera angles to enhance illusions in ways impossible in live performance. On the other hand, television also created unprecedented challenges. The camera could be rewound and replayed, slowed down, paused. Viewers could scrutinize every frame, looking for the secret. Television was a medium that could reveal as easily as it could conceal. How do you perform magic for an audience that can examine everything you do with unprecedented clarity? The magicians who succeeded on television found different answers to this challenge, and their approaches shaped how magic was understood and consumed by several generations. David Copperfield might be the most successful television magician in history. His CBS specials, which aired annually from 1978 to 2001, were watched by hundreds of millions of people worldwide and won 21 Emmy Awards. Copperfield understood something crucial. Television magic needed to be bigger, more spectacular, and more narrative-driven than stage magic. So Copperfield didn't just make things vanish, he made enormous things vanish. In 1983, he made the Statue of Liberty disappear on live television. He positioned an audience on a platform with a clear view of the statue, surrounded the viewing area with a curtain, raised the curtain briefly to show the statue was gone, then lowered it to reveal the statue had returned. The trick combined multiple methods. The platform the audience was on could rotate, though they couldn't feel it. The timing was orchestrated to coincide with the lights on the statue being turned off. The viewing angle and camera positioning were carefully controlled. Was it real? Of course not. The Statue of Liberty didn't actually dematerialize. But millions of viewers watched it happen on their televisions, and the spectacle of it, the audacity of claiming to make one of America's most iconic monuments disappear, created an event that transcended the trick itself. People who couldn't explain how it was done could still appreciate the scale of the production. Copperfield flew, or appeared to fly, across the Grand Canyon through the Great Wall of China over Niagara Falls. He walked through the Great Wall of China. He escaped from Alcatraz prison. These spectacles combined multiple illusions and production techniques. Wire work, camera angles, body doubles, carefully controlled viewing conditions. But they were presented as if Copperfield himself possessed impossible abilities. The narrative element was crucial. Copperfield didn't just perform tricks in sequence, he told stories. He'd have themes for his specials: love, adventure, dreams, and the magic would be woven into narrative structures with character arcs and emotional beats. There would be dancers, elaborate sets, orchestral music, and cinematography that made everything look like a Hollywood production. Magic became a multimedia experience rather than just a series of tricks. Doug Henning took a different approach. Where Copperfield was polished and professional, Henning was whimsical and hippie-esque, performing in rainbow-colored costumes and emphasizing the wonder and joy of magic rather than its mystery or power. His NBC specials in the 1970s and early 1980s brought magic to prime time, with a philosophy that magic should inspire childlike wonder and possibility. Henning believed magic should make people believe in magic again, not as supernatural power, but as a way of seeing the world as full of possibility and wonder. He would talk about magic in terms of expanding consciousness and seeing beyond normal limitations. This fit perfectly with the New Age sensibilities of the 1970s and made magic feel spiritual without claiming actual supernatural abilities. His television specials featured elaborate stage illusions. The classic woman sawed in half, disappearing and reappearing acts, transformations, but presented with a lightness and joy that contrasted with the darker, more mysterious presentations of earlier magicians. Henning smiled constantly, invited audiences to marvel rather than be spooked, and made magic feel safe and celebratory rather than potentially dangerous. Henning also brought magic to Broadway with The Magic Show in 1974, which ran for over 4 years and introduced stage magic to theater audiences who might not have otherwise seen it. He demonstrated that magic could be integrated into narrative theatrical frameworks, and that the tricks themselves could serve story and character rather than just being displays of skill. Penn and Teller represented yet another approach. Magic performed with a postmodern sensibility that simultaneously honored the art and deconstructed it. Their act often involved explaining how a trick was done, then doing an even more impressive trick that the explanation didn't cover. Or they'd perform a trick badly, showing the method, then perform it skillfully in a way that proved they knew what they were doing. Their television show, Penn and Teller, Fool Us, which began in 2011, perfectly captured their philosophy. Magicians would perform for Penn and Teller, and if Penn and Teller couldn't figure out how the trick was done, the magician won. The show was about celebrating magic's craftsmanship while also examining it critically. It acknowledged that these were tricks with methods, not actual miracles, but argued that the artistry and skill involved made them worth appreciating even when you knew they were tricks. Penn did most of the talking. Teller remained silent in performance, though he speaks normally off stage. And his commentary was often about the philosophy of magic, the ethics of deception, the relationship between performer and audience. They positioned magic as an art form worthy of critical discussion, not just something to be passively consumed and amazed by. This intellectual approach to magic appealed to audiences who might have been skeptical of traditional magic presentations. By acknowledging the deception up front, Penn and Teller built trust with audiences who appreciated honesty. By demonstrating deep respect for magic's history and techniques, even while critiquing some of its presentations, they honored the art form while making it more accessible to modern sensibilities. The British magician Darren Brown took television magic in an even more psychological direction. Brown explicitly denied using camera tricks or editing for his effects, claiming everything he did could theoretically be performed live. He positioned his work as psychological manipulation, reading body language, suggestion, and showmanship rather than traditional magic methods. Whether this framing was entirely accurate is debatable. Many magicians suggest that Brown uses traditional magic techniques alongside his psychological methods, but the framing itself was brilliant. By presenting his effects as psychology rather than magic, Brown made them feel more possible and more unsettling. When he predicted lottery numbers, influenced people's decisions, or demonstrated apparent mind reading, the presentation suggested these were things anyone might learn to do with enough study of human psychology. Brown's television specials pushed boundaries in ways that generated both acclaim and controversy. He appeared to convert atheists to religious belief through psychological manipulation, then revealed the manipulation, making a point about faith. He appeared to predict events before they happened. He created elaborate social experiments that explored human behavior under unusual circumstances. His work blurred lines between magic, psychology experiment, and social commentary in ways that television magic hadn't done before. The television era also brought close-up magic into prominence in new ways. Magicians like David Blaine performed street magic, simple tricks with cards, coins, and small objects, but performed for real people in real settings, with cameras capturing their genuine reactions. Blaine's early television specials in the late 1990s featured him approaching random people on streets and performing magic inches from their faces. The genius of this approach was authenticity of reaction. When you watched Blaine make a card appear inside a sealed lemon, or levitate off the ground, or push a coin through glass, you weren't watching a studio audience's reactions. You were watching regular people responding with genuine shock and amazement. The camera would capture their faces at the moment of impossibility, and that human reaction became as much the show as the trick itself. Blaine later moved into endurance stunts that echoed Houdini's approach, burying himself alive, standing on a pole for 35 hours, being frozen in ice, holding his breath underwater. These weren't exactly magic tricks. They were tests of physical and mental endurance presented as entertainment. But they shared magic's fundamental appeal, watching someone do something that seems impossible, wondering if they'll succeed, experiencing genuine tension about the outcome. Television magic also had to navigate the problem of repetition and familiarity. When the same magician appeared on television annually for years, how do you keep the magic fresh? How do you surprise audiences who have seen you perform dozens of times? The answer was escalation. Each special had to be bigger, more spectacular, more surprising than the last. This created an arms race of spectacle. If last year you made a car disappear, this year you need to make a helicopter disappear. If last year you escaped from a water tank, this year you need to escape from a water tank while it's on fire, suspended from a crane. This escalation had consequences. It raised audience expectations to potentially unsustainable levels. It made smaller, more intimate magic seem less impressive by comparison. And it sometimes pushed magicians to attempt things that were genuinely dangerous, where the risk of failure or injury was real rather than theatrical. Television also changed how magic was consumed socially. In the theater, watching magic is a collective experience. You're in a room with hundreds or thousands of other people, and the group energy affects how you experience the performance. On television, you're usually watching in a small group or even alone, which creates a more intimate but less communally reinforced experience. But television created its own form of collective experience through shared cultural moments. When Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear, millions of people watched simultaneously and talked about it the next day. The water-cooler conversation about, "Did you see what Copperfield did last night?" created a different kind of shared experience. Distributed rather than concentrated, but still communal. The decline of magic specials on broadcast television in the 2000s coincided with the fragmentation of media consumption. As cable channels multiplied and internet streaming emerged, the mass audience that had watched annual magic specials dissolved into niche audiences consuming different content. Magic didn't disappear, but it became less of a shared cultural event and more of a specialized interest. Yet television had permanently changed magic. It had proved that magic could be mass entertainment, that it could compete with any other form of television, programming for ratings and cultural impact. It had created a generation of magicians who understood production, editing, and television storytelling. And it had brought magic into millions of homes, making it a familiar part of popular culture rather than something exotic or separate. Here's a curious fact. Right now, as you read these words, you're being deceived. Not by me exactly, but by your own brain. Your eyes are making tiny, rapid movements called saccades several times per second, creating a constantly shifting image. You have a blind spot where your optic nerve connects to your retina. Your peripheral vision is actually quite blurry and colorless, but you don't experience any of this. Your brain seamlessly edits reality, filling in gaps, stabilizing the shaking image, and presenting you with the illusion of smooth, continuous, complete vision. This is the secret that magicians have exploited for thousands of years. We don't perceive reality directly. We perceive our brain's reconstruction of reality, and that reconstruction is full of gaps, assumptions, and edits. Magic works because magicians understand these gaps better than their audiences do. The scientific study of why magic works is relatively recent, but it's revealing fascinating insights into human consciousness, attention, and perception. Neuroscientists and psychologists have begun working with magicians to understand the cognitive principles that make illusions effective. What they're discovering is that magic doesn't just fool us. It reveals fundamental truths about how our minds work. Start with attention. You can't pay attention to everything in your environment simultaneously. There's simply too much information. So your brain uses attention like a spotlight, focusing on what seems important or interesting while mostly ignoring everything else. Magicians exploit this ruthlessly. When a magician directs your attention to their right hand with a dramatic gesture, their left hand is doing the actual work of the trick. You're not just failing to notice. You're cognitively incapable of processing everything at once, so you process what seems important and discard the rest. But it's more sophisticated than simple distraction. Magicians use what researchers call attentional misdirection, not just drawing attention away from the method, but actively constructing a narrative that makes the method literally invisible to consciousness. When a magician tosses a ball in the air twice, then mimes tossing it a third time while secretly palming it, your brain sees the ball go up even though it didn't. Your visual system has been primed by the first two tosses to expect the third, and your brain generates the expected perception even when the actual sensory input doesn't match. This phenomenon, called illusory motion, demonstrates something profound. We don't see what's there, we see what we expect to be there, and when expectations are strong enough, they override actual sensory data. Magicians are experts at creating expectations and then exploiting them. Then there's change blindness, the remarkable human inability to notice even dramatic changes in our environment when those changes occur during a moment of distraction or disruption. In psychology experiments, researchers have shown that people fail to notice when the person they're talking to gets swapped with a completely different person during a brief interruption. In magic, this principle explains why a magician can make a dramatic change to the apparatus during a moment when attention is directed elsewhere, and the audience will swear nothing changed. The key is that the change has to happen when attention is disrupted. If the change happens smoothly while you're watching, you'll see it. But introduce a sudden movement, a flash of light, an unexpected sound, anything that makes your attention jump. And during that microsecond of reorientation, dramatic changes can happen unnoticed. Magicians call these disruptions beats or actions, and expert magicians can hide almost anything during a properly executed beat. Memory also plays a crucial role. When you watch a magic trick, you're not recording it like a video camera. You're constructing a memory based on what you thought was important, what you expected to happen, and what actually occurred. Magicians can exploit this by making you remember events in a different order than they actually happened, or by suggesting elements that weren't actually present. There's a famous principle in mentalism called dual reality, where different audience members have genuinely different experiences of the same event, but each believes their experience is what everyone else experienced. A mentalist might show one person something secretly, then act as if everyone saw it, and people's memories will often edit themselves to match the suggested shared experience rather than their actual individual experience. The psychology of magic also reveals how heavily we rely on assumptions. We assume playing cards are normal unless given reason to think otherwise. We assume boxes are solid unless we see evidence they're not. We assume physical laws apply. Things fall down, solid objects can't pass through each other, objects can't vanish into thin air. Magicians build their effects on these assumptions, constructing situations where the assumptions seem to apply but actually don't. A magician might show you an empty box by opening it and letting you look inside. You see it's empty. But what you don't know is that there's a mirror inside positioned at 45 degrees, reflecting the interior side walls and making the space behind the mirror invisible. The box appears empty because your assumption, that you can see the entire interior, is violated in a way you don't detect. Social and psychological factors also influence how we experience magic. We want to be entertained. We've implicitly agreed to be fooled when we watch a magic show. This willing suspension of disbelief makes us more susceptible to deception, because we're not in the hypervigilant, skeptical mode we might adopt if we thought someone was trying to con us. We're playing a game, and the game's rules include allowing ourselves to be amazed. Authority and framing matter enormously. When someone presents themselves as a magician on a stage, we expect tricks and accept being fooled as part of the entertainment contract. When someone presents themselves as a psychic or medium claiming genuine supernatural abilities, our skepticism should increase. But often doesn't, because the framing has set up different expectations. Darren Brown has done fascinating demonstrations of how changing the framing changes perception. He'll perform the exact same trick twice, once presented as mentalism or psychology, once presented as traditional magic. And audience interpretation of what they saw differs, dramatically based purely on the framing provided. The principle of suspicion suppression is particularly interesting. When a magician performs multiple tricks in succession, our suspicion about methods tends to suppress itself because we can't figure out how the tricks are done. If we knew the method, we could be properly suspicious. I bet he's using a double lift here, or "I think there's a mirror in that box." But when we can't figure out the method, our suspicion has nothing to attach to, so it diffuses into general amazement rather than specific scrutiny. Magicians also exploit what psychologists call inattentional blindness. Our remarkable ability to completely fail to perceive unexpected objects or events when our attention is focused on something else. The famous invisible gorilla experiment demonstrated this. People watching a video and counting basketball passes completely failed to notice a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. Half the participants didn't see the gorilla at all, despite it being clearly visible for several seconds. Magic uses this constantly. When you're focused on watching the magician's hands to see if you can spot the trick, you're not processing the broader context. An assistant might walk on stage, hand the magician something, and walk off, and you won't even remember it happening because your attention was on the magician's hands. But that exchange was the crucial moment when the trick actually happened. Pattern recognition, which serves us so well in daily life, becomes a liability when watching magic. We're evolved to detect patterns, to see regularities, to predict what comes next based on what came before. Magicians exploit this by establishing patterns, showing that something happens the same way 3 times in a row, and then breaking the pattern on the 4th iteration when we're no longer paying close attention because we know what's about to happen. The psychology of magic also illuminates broader questions about consciousness and reality. If our brains can be reliably fooled by magicians who understand perceptual and cognitive principles, what does that say about our everyday perception? How much of what we think we see and remember is reconstruction rather than recording? How reliable are our senses and our memories? These aren't just philosophical questions. They have practical implications. Eyewitness testimony in legal cases is remarkably unreliable, partly because memory works the way magicians understand it works. Constructive, malleable, influenced by expectations and suggestions. Our sense of having continuous, complete awareness is itself something of an illusion, a construction our brains create from fragmentary attention and incomplete perception. Magicians have been practical psychologists for centuries, learning through trial and error what worked to fool audiences. Now that actual psychologists and neuroscientists are studying magic, they're discovering that magicians' intuitive understanding of human perception and cognition was remarkably sophisticated. The techniques that work in magic work because they exploit genuine features of how brains process information. This research is also feeding back into magic itself. Modern magicians can read scientific papers about attention, perception, and memory, and use that knowledge to create new illusions or refine existing ones. The dialogue between magic and science is creating better understanding on both sides. Scientists learn about consciousness by studying why magic works, and magicians create better magic by understanding the science of deception. What makes this particularly beautiful is that understanding the psychology of magic doesn't necessarily ruin magic's appeal. Knowing that your attention is limited doesn't prevent you from being misdirected. Knowing that your memory is reconstructive doesn't prevent magicians from exploiting it. Knowing that your visual system fills in gaps doesn't prevent you from seeing things that aren't there. In fact, understanding how magic works psychologically can deepen appreciation for the art. When you realize how precisely a magician has to control timing, manage attention, and construct experience to create a successful illusion, the skill involved becomes even more impressive. Magic stops being about mysterious supernatural abilities and becomes about profound mastery of human psychology applied for artistic purposes. Walk into a modern magic theater today, perhaps at a Las Vegas casino or a boutique venue in New York or London, and you might see something that would baffle magicians from even 50 years ago. Not because the tricks themselves are necessarily more sophisticated, but because of how diverse magic has become. On one stage, you might see grand illusions that would make Victorian magicians envious. On another, intimate close-up magic performed for a dozen people seated around a table. Elsewhere, a mentalist creating psychological experiences that blur the line between performance and reality. And in another venue entirely, magic might be deconstructed, examined, and rebuilt into something that questions what magic even means. Magic in the modern era has fragmented into specialized forms, each with its own philosophy, techniques, and audience expectations. This diversification has made magic richer and more varied than ever before, but it's also created tensions about what magic should be, who it's for, and what purposes it serves. David Copperfield, whom we discussed in the television chapter, continued his evolution beyond TV specials into a permanent Las Vegas show that ran for years. His approach represents one direction modern magic has taken: spectacle on a scale that only modern technology and budgets can achieve. His shows feature elaborate sets, state-of-the-art lighting and projection, a full orchestra, and illusions that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop and build. This is magic as blockbuster entertainment, comparable to major Broadway productions or Cirque du Soleil shows. The audience isn't just watching tricks. They're experiencing a multimedia event with production values that rival anything in entertainment. This approach has been enormously successful commercially, proving that there's still an appetite for grand theatrical magic, presented at the highest possible level of polish and spectacle. But this style of magic is expensive to produce and requires large audiences to sustain, which means it's concentrated in major entertainment destinations like Las Vegas. Most magicians can't afford this approach, even if they wanted to pursue it. So other forms have evolved to fill different niches. Close-up magic, performed inches away from spectators' faces, represents almost the opposite extreme from Copperfield's spectacle. Magicians like Ricky Jay, who passed away in 2018, elevated close-up magic to an art form that combined technical perfection with scholarly knowledge of magic history and exceptional theatrical presentation. Jay was a master of card manipulation, able to make playing cards do things that seemed physically impossible, even when you were watching his hands from a foot away. He could throw cards with such precision and force that he could slice through watermelons. He could deal any card he wanted from any position in the deck. He performed sleight of hand that fooled other professional magicians who knew exactly what to look for. But Jay was also a historian and scholar of magic and unusual entertainments. He collected rare books and documents about magic, unusual performers, and carnival attractions. His one-man show, Ricky Jay and his 52 assistants, combined incredible card magic with stories about historical performers, creating entertainment that was simultaneously a magic show and a history lecture. Though the history was often about charlatans, con men, and unusual performers rather than respectable figures. This scholarly approach to magic represents another modern direction. Magic that's intellectually sophisticated, historically informed, and self-aware about its place in cultural history. Jay's work appealed to audiences who wanted more than just being fooled. They wanted context, story, and a sense that they were witnessing something culturally and historically significant. Darren Brown, whom we mentioned in the television chapter, represents yet another direction. Magic that positions itself primarily as psychological demonstration rather than traditional conjuring. Brown explicitly rejects the term magician, preferring mentalist or psychological illusionist. He claims, though many magicians are skeptical, that he uses no camera tricks, stooges, or traditional magic apparatus, just psychological techniques, suggestion, misdirection, and reading people. Whether or not this framing is entirely accurate, and most magicians believe Brown uses traditional magic methods alongside psychological techniques, the framing itself is significant. By positioning his work as psychology rather than magic, Brown makes it appeal to audiences who might be skeptical of traditional magic presentations. He's created a brand of magic that feels more contemporary, more scientific, more compatible with modern sensibilities. Brown's live shows and television specials have pushed into territory that's more social experiment than magic show. He's created situations where participants' beliefs, behaviors, and decisions are influenced and then revealed, raising questions about free will, the power of suggestion, and how much of our decision-making is actually under conscious control. This transforms magic from entertainment into something more like participatory philosophy. The approach has been controversial. Some critics argue that Brown's presentations oversimplify complex psychological research or make claims about psychological influence that aren't actually supported by scientific evidence. Others suggest that framing magic as psychology is just another form of misdirection, making audiences focus on psychological explanations while traditional magic methods do the actual work. But controversy aside, Brown's success demonstrates that there's an audience for magic that presents itself as something other than traditional magic, that engages with ideas about consciousness and influence, and that creates experiences more complex than simple amazement. Then there's the underground card magic scene, a subculture of mostly young magicians who create and share incredibly sophisticated card tricks, often filmed in close-up and shared on social media. These aren't elaborate stage productions. They're 3-minute videos of someone doing something impossible with a deck of cards, shot on an iPhone, viewed by millions. This scene has its own stars like Shin Lim, who won America's Got Talent in 2018 with card manipulation so smooth and elegant that it looked like the cards were moving by themselves. Lim performs in complete silence, letting the visual impossibility speak for itself, with manipulation techniques refined to a level of precision that would have amazed magicians from any previous era. The internet has transformed how magic is shared, learned, and consumed. Young magicians can watch tutorials, buy trick explanations, and study performances from the world's best magicians without ever leaving their homes. This has dramatically accelerated skill development. A dedicated teenager today can achieve technical proficiency that would have taken decades to develop in earlier eras. But it's also created challenges. The availability of trick explanations online means that many classic tricks are easily discoverable by anyone curious enough to search. This has forced magicians to create new material constantly, to develop personal presentations that transcend the methods, and to rely more on performance and character than on secret methods alone. Some magicians have embraced this transparency, creating content that's educational rather than mysterious. They'll teach tricks, explain principles, and demystify magic while still maintaining that there's artistry beyond just knowing the secret. This reflects a broader cultural shift toward valuing craft and skill over mystery, for mystery's sake. Magic has also become more diverse in terms of who performs it and how it's presented. Historically, magic was dominated by white men performing in particular styles. Modern magic is increasingly performed by people of all genders, ethnicities, and backgrounds, bringing new perspectives and presentations to the art. Magicians like Legacy Wind create magic that's deeply personal and narrative-driven, telling stories through magic rather than just performing tricks. Others like Helder Gimmeries combine magic with theater in ways that blur the boundaries between the two art forms, creating shows that are as much plays as magic performances. The comedy magic scene has also evolved. While comedy and magic have always been intertwined, modern comedy magicians like Mac King in Las Vegas have created shows where the magic serves the comedy as much as the comedy serves the magic. The tricks become setups for jokes, and the laughs become as important as the amazement. Corporate and trade show magic represents another modern specialization. Magicians who perform at business events using magic to draw crowds to booths, deliver marketing messages, or create memorable brand experiences. This is magic in service of commerce, which has its own ethical complexities, but also demonstrates magic's adaptability to various contexts. Street magic, popularized by David Blaine's early television work, continues as both guerrilla performance art and busking tradition. Magicians performing on street corners, in parks, or in public spaces create a different dynamic than theater performances. The audience is transient, attention must be captured quickly, and the environment is unpredictable. But successful street magicians can build substantial audiences and incomes while maintaining creative control impossible in more commercial venues. The intersection of magic and technology has created new possibilities and new questions. Augmented reality, projection mapping, and interactive technology can create effects that weren't possible before. But when does technologically enabled impossibility stop being magic and become just special effects? If an apparent levitation is achieved through augmented reality viewed through a smartphone app, is that meaningfully different from a CGI effect in a movie? These questions don't have clear answers, and different magicians have different perspectives. Some embrace technology as expanding magic's possibilities. Others argue that magic's power comes from happening in real space, real time, without technological mediation, and that relying on screens and apps diminishes the essential quality that makes magic different from other forms of visual entertainment. Modern magic also grapples with ethical questions more explicitly than in earlier eras. The Magic Circle and other professional organizations have codes of ethics, but debates continue about exposure, about magicians who perform for dictators or at ethically problematic events, about cultural appropriation in magic presentations, and about the gender and racial dynamics of who gets opportunities and recognition. The Penn and Teller approach, simultaneously honoring and deconstructing magic, represents a very modern sensibility. Their Las Vegas show includes classic tricks performed beautifully alongside tricks that reveal methods, comedy that mocks magic's pretensions, and meta-commentary about magic as an art form. They invite audiences to think about magic rather than just experiencing it, creating a more intellectually engaged relationship with the art. This self-aware, postmodern approach to magic reflects broader cultural shifts. Audiences today are media-savvy, understand how editing and effects work, and are generally more skeptical than audiences of earlier eras. Magic that acknowledges this skepticism and works with it rather than against it can create different kinds of engagement. What unites all these diverse approaches is the fundamental human appeal of experiencing impossibility. Whether it's a grand illusion in a Las Vegas theater, a card trick performed on Instagram, a psychological demonstration that questions free will, or a scholarly presentation of historical magic, the core experience is the same. Seeing or experiencing something that shouldn't be possible, that challenges our understanding of reality, that creates a moment of genuine wonder. The diversification of magic means there's no longer one canonical form or presentation style. Magic has become a broad category encompassing many different approaches, philosophies, and techniques. This diversity makes the art form healthier and more adaptable. But it also means that magic, as a category, has become harder to define clearly. Perhaps that's appropriate for an art form based on controlled deception. Magic has always been slippery, resistant to easy categorization, existing in liminal spaces between entertainment and art, between honesty and deception, between the possible and impossible. Modern magic's diversity simply makes this essential slipperiness more explicit. Imagine trying to perform magic for an audience that can slow down, rewind, and replay every moment of your performance. An audience that can examine everything you do from multiple angles simultaneously. An audience that has access to detailed explanations of thousands of tricks, searchable in seconds. An audience that has seen sophisticated CGI create impossibilities in movies and video games that dwarf anything a stage magician could accomplish. This is the reality of magic in the digital age, and it's created both unprecedented challenges and unexpected opportunities for magicians. The most obvious challenge is exposure. As we discussed in the previous chapter, the internet has made magic secrets widely available, but it's not just that methods are explained. It's that performances themselves can be scrutinized frame by frame. When David Blaine's early street magic specials aired in the late 1990s, clips were immediately uploaded to the internet and analyzed in detail. People would pause, zoom, look for wires, search for edits, and discuss their theories on forums. This level of scrutiny would have been impossible in earlier eras. When you watched a magic show on television before the internet age, you saw it once at the speed it was broadcast, from the angles the producers chose. You could remember and discuss, but you couldn't review. Now every televised magic performance becomes a permanent record available for unlimited examination. Some magicians have responded by avoiding television entirely, preferring live performance where recording can be controlled or prohibited. Others have adapted, creating magic specifically designed to withstand digital scrutiny. Effects that look good even on close examination, that don't rely on camera tricks or editing, that create genuine impossibility rather than televisual illusion. But the internet has also created new opportunities for magic. Social media platforms, particularly Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, have allowed magicians to reach global audiences without traditional gatekeepers like television networks or booking agents. A talented magician can post a video, have it go viral, and build a substantial following without ever performing in a traditional venue. This has democratized access to audiences in ways that would have seemed impossible 20 years ago. A teenager in their bedroom can potentially reach more people with a single video than a touring magician of previous eras could reach in a year of performances. This has created new kinds of magic celebrities. People who are famous primarily through social media rather than through traditional performance venues. Shin Lim's trajectory is instructive. He started posting videos of his card manipulation on YouTube while he was still in college. The videos went viral within magic communities and then broke through to general audiences. This online following gave him credibility and recognition that led to television appearances, including winning America's Got Talent, which then led to a Las Vegas residency. The path went from bedroom videos to one of magic's most prestigious performance opportunities, all enabled by digital platforms. Social media magic has developed its own aesthetic. Videos are typically short, often under a minute, because that's what platforms favor and what audiences' attention spans support. The magic needs to be visually clear and impactful even on small phone screens. And the effects often build to a reveal that's designed to be screenshot and shared, creating viral potential. This has influenced what kinds of magic thrive on social media. Visual tricks that photograph well, card flourishes and manipulation that create striking images, unexpected reveals that shock and surprise. These work better than subtle psychological magic or effects that depend on live interaction. So social media has shaped what magic looks like, just as television did before it. The comment sections on magic videos create interesting dynamics. Viewers will discuss methods, share theories, and sometimes post explanations, creating a collective investigative process that magicians have to anticipate. Some magicians have embraced this, creating tricks with deliberately misleading elements that lead to incorrect theories, or effects that remain mysterious even after extensive discussion. Live streaming has created another new form of magic performance. Magicians can perform for audiences watching on Twitch, YouTube, or other platforms, creating interactive shows where viewers can request specific tricks, participate in effects, or influence the performance in real time. This combines some advantages of live performance with the reach of digital media. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when live performance became impossible, many magicians pivoted to virtual shows performed via Zoom or other video conferencing platforms. This created unique challenges. How do you perform magic when the audience is watching through webcams on their personal devices? But it also created interesting innovations. Magicians developed effects specifically for the virtual format, using the limitations and capabilities of video conferencing as features rather than bugs. Some magicians created effects where objects would appear or transform on viewers' own screens, or where participants in different locations would experience connected impossibilities. This required rethinking what magic could be when you couldn't hand someone a card to examine or show them a prop from different angles. Augmented reality, AR, represents another frontier for digital magic. Apps can overlay digital elements on the physical world, viewed through smartphone screens. Magicians have experimented with AR effects where playing cards seem to come alive on your phone, or where impossible transformations happen in the space around you when viewed through an AR app. But this creates philosophical questions. Is this still magic, when the impossibility exists only in digital overlay rather than physical reality? Has something essential been lost? Different magicians have different answers. Some embrace AR as expanding magic's possibilities into new dimensions. Others argue that magic's power comes from happening in shared physical reality, and that AR creates a different kind of experience that might be impressive, but isn't quite magic. The use of social media for promotion and audience building has also changed magic's economics and career paths. Previously, a magician needed booking agents, publicity, and access to physical venues to build a career. Now a magician can build a following online, monetize through ad revenue, sponsorships, and online courses, and potentially create a sustainable career without ever performing in traditional venues. This has advantages: lower barriers to entry, direct connection with audiences, creative control, but also drawbacks. The algorithms that determine what content gets promoted can be fickle and opaque. Building a sustainable income from online content requires consistent output and engagement that can be exhausting. And the pressure to create viral content can push towards spectacle over artistry, quantity over quality. Digital technology has also enabled new forms of magical collaboration and knowledge sharing. Magicians around the world can share ideas, techniques, and innovations through video, online forums, and virtual conferences. This has accelerated innovation and allowed isolated practitioners to connect with broader communities. But it's also contributed to the exposure problem, making it harder to keep methods secret when they can be discussed and demonstrated globally. Magic apps and digital magic tools have created new possibilities. There are apps that can force choices, deliver information to magicians secretly, create apparently random outcomes that are actually controlled, and enable effects that would be impossible without technology. Some magicians use these tools extensively, while others avoid them, preferring magic that doesn't depend on potentially unreliable technology. The integration of technology into magic performances raises another question. At what point does a magic trick become a technology demonstration? If an effect relies primarily on sophisticated electronics, coding, or digital trickery, is it meaningfully different from a tech demo or a special effect? Where's the line between magic and technology-enabled illusion? These questions don't have definitive answers, but they're actively debated within magic communities. Some argue that magic has always used the best available technology, that ancient magicians used mirrors and mechanisms that were cutting edge for their time, and that using modern technology is simply continuing that tradition. Others contend that magic requires human skill and that over-reliance on technology diminishes the art. Digital editing and special effects have also created challenges for credibility. When audiences know that video can be edited and enhanced, how do they distinguish between magic and editing? Magicians who perform on video have to work harder to establish credibility, often showing effects from multiple angles, performing in single continuous shots, or having live audiences whose reactions verify authenticity. Some magicians have responded by emphasizing live performance specifically because it can't be edited. They position live magic as more authentic, more impressive, more real than anything that can be achieved with digital manipulation. The inability to rewind, the shared space and time with the performer, the collective witnessing. These become selling points in an age of digital skepticism. The future of magic in the digital age is uncertain. Will virtual reality create new performance spaces for magic? Will AI and machine learning enable new kinds of effects or new ways of personalizing magic for individual viewers? Will quantum computing somehow intersect with magic's long association with probability and uncertainty? Or will there be a reaction against digital magic, a return to valuing purely analog performance? What seems certain is that magic will continue to adapt, as it has adapted to every previous technological and social change. The fundamental human appeal of experiencing impossibility doesn't depend on any particular technology or presentation format. As long as humans want to experience wonder, to see things they can't explain, to momentarily believe that reality is more mysterious and possibility-rich than everyday life suggests, there will be a place for magic. Tonight, we've traced a thread through thousands of years of human history, following magic from ancient temples where priests spoke through statues, into our modern digital era where anyone with a smartphone can share wonder with the world. What emerges from this journey is that magic isn't really about tricks at all. It's about something fundamental to human experience. Magic persists because we want it to persist. In an age of science and explanation, when so much has been demystified and understood, magic offers controlled doses of mystery. It reminds us that our perception is limited, that our understanding is incomplete, that reality is stranger and more possibility-filled than everyday life suggests. And it does all this safely, playfully, in contexts where we consent to being amazed and deceived. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history and evolution of magic. If you're already drifting off, then our mission is complete. But if you're still awake, perhaps another deep dive through one of our previous episodes will carry you gently into slumber. Until we meet again in these quiet hours, may you find wonder in the everyday. May you appreciate the artistry in skilled deception. And may you always preserve that part of yourself that can delight in the impossible, even while knowing it's a beautifully executed illusion.